Welcome to the Rusted Garden Homestead. This video is all about the basics for a fall garden. Please follow me, subscribe. I'm going to be doing a whole series in 2024 on growing a fall garden. And what I want to start with are just really 10 tips, maybe more, on direct seeding, starting transplants, getting your fall garden started. This is the remains of all my summer crops. They're starting to die back. The fall is approaching. Today is the 25th of August. Things are starting to cool down just a little bit. But let's go over to where I have my fall crops, and we'll talk about a couple of things to really keep you on track so you can be successful in your fall garden. It's August 25th. Fall temperatures are coming here in Maryland. It's been 90 plus, 70-degree nights. Over the last 7-10 days, the temperatures have come down. They're going back up a little bit. But first tip, this whole space right in here is my fall garden for right now. It's going to be expanded out, towards the rest of the garden as the crops die off and I have more space. One thing I recommend is try and keep all your initial seed starts, direct seeding. I'm going to talk about a transplant bed, what that is, in the same area. It's much easier to come out here and water it that way. Some of these plants are actually going to get moved. First bed that I put in, again today is August 25th. I put in plants on July 14th. All right in here were beets, and they all look like the guy right back there. While I was gone for a couple of days, grasshoppers came in, chewed them all down. So there's not much going on here. I'm trying to keep them alive. Turnips did really well. The beets should be up, looking pretty big. Direct seeding is a great way to get a lot of your crops started. If you look at my videos on what to seed in August, that will guide you through some of these cool crops, fall garden seeds to put into the ground. I will link that in the video description. But today I just want to go over the principles. Putting in some rows, dating at 7/14, trying to figure out that sweet spot for putting in your cool weather crops into warm soil when the temperatures are still in the 90s. You could put a shade cloth over here, help them up. Your cool weather crops can take a frost, meaning the leaves don't get destroyed. They like the cooler weather. They like 50-degree nights, lower 60-degree nights, 70-degree days. They like the cooler temperatures. When it's 90s and the ambient temperature, the surrounding temperature is that warm, sun hits here, bakes the top couple inches up to 100, 110 degrees. You can't grow the cool season crops June and July because they get too hot. Sometimes they don't grow well, sometimes they just want to bolt and flower. You don't get delicious leaves, you don't get delicious beets, the leafy greens flower. It just doesn't work. You can use the warmth of August, and you have to get the timing down right. So I recommend putting in some plants on 7/14, some plants in, on 7/28, some plants in on August 7th. Just some seeds, direct seeding, and seeing which ones do really well. What that will allow you to do is figure out next year when you want to direct seed your beets, your lettuce, your turnips, your kales, and other crops so that they get a great jump start. Like, look at those turnips. They do pretty well in the heat. They're going to be ready for the table much earlier in the fall because I use the warmth of August to really get them growing. And then when I want them to mature and taste their best, the temperature is going to come down. So, for instance, maybe beets would have been perfect on 7/14, but the grasshoppers came, messed them up. I'm going to put more beets in other places. I'll talk about this example of, direct seeding at different times when we talk about some peas. Turnips went in on 7/14. I can put on my list. Turnips do really well, planted here in Maryland, middle of July, late July. They're going to be a great fall crop. And beets would be doing pretty good too if the grasshoppers didn't come in. If you look down here, here's one of the mistakes that I'll be talking about more in depth in a little bit in the video. And use the timestamps to jump around. Even though these are in big cells, I moved these out here this morning. It's 5 o'clock in the afternoon now. The sun dried them out really, really quickly. So I really first want to give them a quick water. So a couple of things. When you are growing transplants, you can grow them in two ways. And I'll be talking about growing them outdoors in a second. But indoors, and the reason you might grow these indoors is because the outdoor issues that come up are too much sun, they get too warm, insects, pests, problems. So you want to start these indoors, keep them protected. You want to start them in larger cells like that so that they can grow bigger roots. The bigger the roots are, the better they're going to take off once put into the garden. But you'd be growing them inside for 6 to 8 weeks. We have kale and collards on the right. some cabbage, lettuce is right there, other cabbages, beets. It doesn't really matter. Most of the plants you want a good 6 weeks, 8 weeks worth of growth, and you can start them indoors sooner, maybe in July when it's way too hot to be out in your garden. Maybe you have a shorter fall, you still have a hot summer, so you want to grow these inside at a regulated temperature of about 70 degrees, whatever your house is, and they get to size, and then you put them out, towards the end of August, beginning of September, they do really well. But I recommend, and the key tip here is, you don't want to have these grow inside, not be exposed to the sun. When you bring them outside, you have to acclimate them over a week's time, make sure the sun doesn't damage them, and very often the late summer sun still damages your plants when they're grown inside because they're not used to the UV rays of the sun. They burn, basically. They'll bleach yellow, the leaves will die off. As soon as they break the surface, as soon as they germinate, take them outside every couple of days and let them get the sun for a good hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. When the seeds germinate and break the surface, they don't know they're not in the sun. They don't become weak to the UV rays until they're growing a couple weeks indoors. So if you expose them to the sun early on, they toughen up, and it's just like they're being grown outside. So you're growing these inside 6 or 8 weeks. You bring them outside 3-4 times a week for a couple hours of sun. They get the best of both worlds, and you have really strong transplants that are ready to go out into the ground. We'll talk about outdoor transplants in a second. Another strategy is I just used this small space and I planted there's 3 cabbage plants there. There's a couple collard plants right there. They went in on 714 also, just like the plants I showed you. And look how big they are. That's about, 4 weeks? That's about 40 days. So that's 5-6 weeks of growth. They're massive. I spaced them out well enough that I can come in with a shovel, dig right into there, dig out a big root ball, and these are going to get placed where I want them to be. They're way too close together for cabbage and collards. But by doing an outdoor transplant bed, I didn't have to run all over the place and dust and water. I had whitefly issues with these. You can see them right here. Again, you have to be really up on managing the insects because that is a problem. When you're going from spring to summer, winter to late spring, all the insects are dead. A lot of stuff is dormant. Stuff is hatching, just coming out of the ground. When you plant in August, everything is active and they're going to attack your plant. So you have to be ready for that. And what I do recommend is just spraying a fungicide or an insect spray or dust as soon as you put them in the ground as transplants like this. Keep things under control. So I like doing this as a transplant bed. These again, we said are 40 days old, about 6 weeks. The transplants here, even though they're dried out, they're 7-8 weeks old, much bigger in the bed. So that's just another strategy for growing your own transplants. You don't have to put them in a permanent place right now. Just anywhere you have a space, you can grow your cabbages and your kales and other plants and then move them later. Just make sure you leave enough space for the shovel to go in nice and deep, not disturb the next transplant you want to put somewhere else, and you have a perfect setup for having a transplant bed like this. Again, today is August 25th. These were started on July 29th. Endives over here on the left. This is a Chinese cabbage. They're in the larger cells like I've been talking about, being managed with water in a place where they're not getting pounded by the sun. However, insects are really a problem. Unlike growing, as I was saying, from spring into summer, when the ground has been frozen, insects are dormant, been killed off, the eggs have to hatch. We have very active insect problems now going from the summer into the fall. So the cabbage here was all chewed down by insects very quickly when I was gone for a couple of days. So you really want to pay attention to the insect pressure when you're starting your seeds like this. Transplants are outdoors and just sitting around, and even when you get them into the ground, I really do recommend spraying something for fungus and also spraying something for insects early on, just so that this doesn't happen. The other tip in here too is that this is a standard seed flat. I sell all of this at my seed shop. Because it gets really hot, sometimes into the 90s, I do fill this up about 1/4 of the way, gives extra water to the seed starts so they don't dry out quickly and die off. Remember, the sun beating down on these for 10 hours can dry them out very quickly, and within an hour or two the whole plant can be killed off. So don't put your outdoor seed starts in direct sun where they're going to be out there for a good 8-10 hours. You want them to be kind of protected where it's a little bit shady. You know, you can move them around if you want, but don't let them, you know, get baked by the sun. The other thing that happens is not only do they dry out, if you were growing something like arugula, spinach, bok choy or pak choy, this heats up so much, those plants bolt really quickly, and if you're keeping them growing in here for 4 to 8 weeks, they're going to actually bolt very quickly. They're going to send up flower stalks, sometimes before you even get them into the ground. The cool soil temperature keeps them growing slowly. That's what we want for a fall garden. Soil gets too hot for a prolonged period, certain cool weather crops are going to flower before you even get them into the ground. The plants that I have here are Brussels, Chinese cabbage, red kale, beets, Swiss chard, lettuces. This is a couple of different kales and collards, and I have broccoli and cauliflower. You don't really need to start beets in a seed cell or Swiss chard. They grow really well direct seeded, but I'm needed that because I lost some of my beets, and you know, beets come up really tangled together. One beet seed is actually it's a pod, so it's multiple seeds in there. So I'll tease them apart. Not the best way to do beets, but definitely recommend Brussels, cabbages, Chinese cabbage or otherwise, kale, lettuces, even spinach, collards, if I didn't miss that one, collards, and then broccoli and cauliflower to seed start them in these larger cells. Indoors, outdoors as transplants. When you're putting them outside earlier, like middle of July, or you're trying to figure out the timing, a shade cloth over the space will make a big difference, like a 50% shade cloth. It will keep everything cooler, which is really nice because you can just grow your transplants like that. Otherwise, follow the examples I'm talking about for indoor seed starting or outdoor seed starting in these trays. You want about 6 to 8 weeks worth of growth in these trays. The bigger cells make all the difference, and that's going to give you a nice jump on the season. Now, you can direct seed, like these have all been direct seeded, obviously, on 714. If this was the permanent place, I would space them out properly. We're not going to get into spacing for all the plants. I'll be doing that through the series, and we'll be kind of focusing on a couple plants over the next couple of weeks, so please subscribe. So you would just space them out differently. Direct seeding works. It's the cheapest way to have a garden. Carrots are in. I highly recommend getting carrots in early. They love the early warmth. They germinate nicely. They grow nicely. And then as the season cools, they start developing their root and you get a really sweet carrot. Journaling is probably going to be your biggest friend. When I come around here, the peas in this area were planted on 7/18. And I was trying to figure out, you know, the right time to get peas in the ground. And if you look at the ones down here, you can see they're kind of dried and a little beat up. They're pretty tall. Bottoms got beat up. The heat came in. That was on 7/18. And remember, today is August 25th. When I come around here, put in the same variety, green arrows, on 7/31. About, what is that? I don't know, 10, 13 days later. They look great. Not quite as big, but big enough. They germinated really in 4 or 5 days. And I guess for the last tip, that's the beauty to understand, is that when you put in seeds in spring for a fall garden, these cool crops can be planted in the spring. They like the cold, they can take a frost. They can be planted late summer, fall, depending on where you live. They can take a frost, they grow through the fall, even into early winter, sometimes through winter, if you're in a place that doesn't get freezing winters. When you direct seed in spring, the ground is really cold, so germination is much slower. When you plant or direct seed in August, be it August, September, July, they germinate extremely quickly because the soil is warm. Now, in knowing that, you really have to water these, and that's what I want to get to. These, remember, dried out. And they're pretty big cells just within, sorry, these came out, let me just get it right, about 9 a.m. today, 5 p.m., that's 8 hours later, they were dried out. You want to water your direct seeded seeds every day for a good 14 days, maybe 21 days. The sun can dry that top 2 inches out like that. So if they germinate, you know you've been watering, they germinate, you let it go for 2 days, you have a 90-degree day, full sun, it can kill off all your germinating seeds. The root doesn't get deep enough, there's not enough moisture. So the key with direct seeding summer into fall is to water your plants just about every day. Probably not twice a day, but just a nice deep watering. Your transplants that you put into the ground only have a small root ball. So they have all this upper growth and then this tiny little root ball. This growth is going to suck all the water out of this area. So even if it's soaked all around the plant, the root system isn't big enough. So you have to water your transplants that 14 days, that 21 days. Same with the direct seeding. If they sprout up, sun bakes them, it can kill off the germinating seeds. So the key for success from summer into fall is water, water, water until the plants are well established. In the spring, you can get away with watering it when you put the plants in and maybe come back 3 days later. It's been cool, the water's still there, the plants aren't being stressed for water. So you really have to up the watering. And just to recap, you're going to have fungus issues, insect issues, so you really want to dust and spray these early and protect them. If you have birds coming in or animals coming in, you can take something like this. This is a dish rack from a thrift store that was $2. And really, see if that'll come out. You just plant and then you drop this over them, and this will keep birds away from coming in and pecking your germinating seeds. Sometimes birds come in and just tear it up, or you know, smaller rodents coming in and messing up things. Finally, I just want to leave you with, don't overplant. You saw the white flies coming in on some of my collards right there. In the past, I would grow like 6, 8, 10 collard plants and kale plants. I can't eat all that. I only need about 2 of each, so 4. By growing less, you can better concentrate on taking care of the plants and keep the pests and the diseases under control. If you put in 6, 8, 10 collards, kales, and you don't need them, you're just creating a haven for problems to roll in, and it's going to be really difficult because white flies, aphids, crickets, they love these greens, and it's a lot harder to take care of a dozen plants than it is to really focus on 4 plants. So don't overplant your fall garden. Thanks so much for watching. Again, please subscribe. I will teach you how to grow through the fall in the earth beds, in containers, but this is just the precursor to really getting your fall garden set up. Think about whether or not you want to start them indoors, outdoors, in containers, in seed starting trays. If you want to do a transplant bed, experiment with putting seeds in at different times, keep a journal, track how they do, and then come next year, you'll have the timing down for when to get your fall crops into the garden. Thanks so much for watching. Please check out my seed shop at therustedgarden.com. And take a deep breath. I know this summer can be frustrating, we get burned out, but get a couple fall crops in. I think you'll have a great time. Thanks for watching.